Hello guys, welcome to Election Future. I don't think he'd gain 2, 3, or 4 points, but I think he'd gain about a point. Right now, my national average has him winning the popular vote by 2.8%. So let's say he wins the popular vote by close to 4 because he'd be at 3.8%. Let's say we're working with a Trump plus 4 national popular vote. Looking at that, the safe Republican states are the ones that he won by a decent amount in the previous election. This also now includes Maine's 2nd district, Iowa, Ohio, as well as the state of Alaska, including Nebraska at large and Nebraska's 1st district. That puts Trump at 149. Texas and Florida would also be in the safe Republican column as well in this forecast. I think you would probably have the state of Hawaii potentially be likely in this scenario. I think California would still be safe, and Washington and Oregon would be in the likely column. Colorado, Illinois, Vermont, Maryland, D.C., and Massachusetts would be in the safe Democrat column. New York would get slightly closer, but not by much. Connecticut, New Jersey, and Rhode Island would probably be in the likely column. Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania would all be in the likely column for the former president. Before we get into the details, please like and subscribe to the video and comment on your thoughts. Which side do you favor, blue or red? I basically already have him winning the Rust Belt, all the swing states by this margin. If Trump's winning the popular vote by 4, he would probably end up getting extra support from Biden in some of the Atlanta area. He'd likely pick up some support in the Charlottesville areas in North Carolina, Maricopa, and Clark County. He would make marginal differences in those big city areas, helping him with more reluctant Rust Belt voters, funnily enough. In this scenario, Delaware could get within 5 points. It would be one of those situations where, if Biden endorsed Trump, he might help make Delaware competitive. Delaware only voted for Joe Biden by about 19 points, but in 2016, Hillary Clinton only won the state by 11, and it doesn't have a large population for significant shifts. Joe endorsing Donald Trump could ironically make Delaware competitive. I think Maine's 1st district would probably be likely. Trump might gain from Maine at large and New Hampshire. Nebraska's 2nd district could flip, along with New Mexico and Virginia. Minnesota wouldn't budge. Harris is still polling well there. And even if Trump wins the popular vote by 4, Harris would likely hold Minnesota. If Joe Biden ironically endorsed the former president, Trump would likely pick up New Mexico, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Maine at large. It would be interesting to see how it plays out. This scenario is speculative and hypothetical, but it could be plausible if Joe Biden were to endorse Trump. It wouldn't flip the race to make it safe for Trump, but it might help him gain support from reluctant Trump-Biden voters who aren't voting for Trump this time. Biden's endorsement could actually help Trump with black voters, possibly gaining 3 to 5 points, and it could also help with Hispanic voters, potentially by 5 points. Trump might gain a point with white voters nationally from a Biden endorsement, making a slight difference. Currently, my election map looks like this. New Hampshire is competitive. Minnesota is slightly over a point for Harris. New Mexico is about a 3-point win, and Virginia is a bit more of a victory. Maine at large is nearly a 4-point win for Harris. Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nevada are still leaning, with Pennsylvania and Nevada close to being likely states for Trump. In my model, he's already winning big. Texas is almost safe Republican, and Florida is around a 10-point victory. Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina are over 6 points each for Trump. Nebraska's 2nd district is in the tilt Democrat column. Who is on track to win this race in November? Let's start with the safe states for both candidates. Former President Donald Trump is almost certain to hold Indiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia, along with the southern states of Tennessee, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Missouri. Then there's Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska's statewide contest in the 1st and 3rd districts, South and North Dakota, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, and finally Alaska. Trump carried each of these states by more than 10 percentage points in the 2020 election and should do so again in November. Please comment with your thoughts on who do you think will win the election? Now, Kamala Harris will carry Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii, the Pacific Coast Blue Wall. Additionally, there's Colorado, Illinois, and, in the Northeast, New York, Maine's 1st district, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and finally the District of Columbia. Each of these states backed Joe Biden by more than 10 points in 2020 and have not voted for a Republican presidential candidate in at least 20 years. Taking a look at the race to 270 electoral votes, Harris has 191, while Trump has 125. 17 states remain in play for both candidates, and I will now assign a rating to each of them based on how strongly they lean toward either party. First up, the likely states. As the name implies, these are states that are very likely to go to one candidate, but an upset is not out of the question, as it is in the solid states. For Trump, this includes the Midwest tandem of Iowa with 6 electoral votes and Ohio with 17 electoral votes. This is a tandem because they have followed nearly identical trends over the last decade and a half, voting Democrat for Barack Obama in 2008 and again in 2012, before then jolting hard to the right in favor of Trump in 2016 by a margin of 9 points in Iowa and 8 points in Ohio, and then again in 2020 by 8 points each. It was Trump's strength among working class, especially white non-college educated voters, in these 2 states that has put them almost entirely out of reach for Democrats at this point. I fully expect Trump to carry both Iowa and Ohio by around 8 to 10 points again. The former president is also heavily favored to hold the second largest state in the nation, Texas, and the third largest, Florida, with 30 and 40 electoral votes, respectively. In Texas, Trump's margin did drop from 9 points in 2016 to just 5.5 in 2020, as Biden received the highest Democratic vote share, 46.5%, since Texas last went blue in 1976. But this may prove to be the party's peak unless they can suddenly roll back the unprecedented Republican gains among Hispanic voters down in the Rio Grande Valley that helped Trump win the same share as he did in 2016, 52%. Now in 2024, the polls show Trump expanding his margin to more than 7 points based on an average of the last 3 polls. Moving on to Florida, a key swing state, yet like Ohio and Iowa, it has lurched to the right in the Trump era. He carried it by more than 3 points in 2020, one of only 5 states where he actually improved his margin compared to 2016. In the 2022 midterms, Republican incumbents Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio were both re-elected in landslide fashion, both by more than 15 points each. Now, just like Texas, we see the former president expanding his lead in Florida to 6 points, based on the last 5 polls, all of which show Trump up by at least 3 points. Back to the map, those 4 states lift Trump's electoral tally to 218. Now let's get to the likely blue states. Harris is heavily favored in New Mexico, which has 5 electoral votes. It voted for Biden by 11 points in 2020 and remains strongly in the Democratic corner, with the only poll showing Harris up by 10. She is also likely to hold the statewide contest up in Maine in the Democratic column, one of 2 states, along with Nebraska, that split their electoral votes, awarding 2 to the statewide winner and 1 per district. Maine has consistently voted blue at the presidential level since 1988, and both of the polls surveyed in 2024 show Harris up by a wide margin. That wraps up the likely states, raising Harris's tally to 198, trailing Trump in the race to 270 as we head into the lean states. Before we get there, though, only about 20% of my viewers are actually subscribed to my channel. So please take a second to subscribe below. It's completely free and helps me continue to make content like this. Now, the lean states have about a 65 to 80% chance of voting one way. I would be surprised but not entirely shocked if they don't. Starting with Vice President Harris this time, she should hold the state of Minnesota in her corner, where her running mate Tim Walz currently serves as governor. Minnesota voted for Joe Biden by 7 points in the 2020 election. And while the polls showed a much tighter race while Biden was still in the race, Harris has led in both polls since he dropped out by at least 5 points. Ultimately, if Harris wins this election, she should carry Minnesota by at least 4 points. Anything less would be trouble. The same can be said for the Commonwealth of Virginia and the state of New Hampshire. Virginia voted for Biden by 10 points in the 2020 election, the first time a Democrat has carried it by double digits since 1944. It's another state where Biden was polling terribly before he dropped out. In fact, Trump even led in the Real Clear Politics polling average in late July. However, with Harris, she has taken back the lead and then some, up more than 5 points now based on the last 3 polls. Virginia is the kind of state where she should be outperforming Biden with a relatively high share of Black and young, college-educated voters, a couple of demographic groups that Biden had been losing support with against Trump. At this very moment, Harris has a similar margin in Virginia and Minnesota, and together these 3 states lift her electoral vote tally ahead of Trump, now with 225. This will actually increase by 1, as she is also heavily favored in Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. This Omaha-based district voted for Joe Biden by more than 6 points in the 2020 election and has shifted more than 14 points to the left since Mitt Romney won it by 7 points in 2012. So Harris is likely to extract an electoral vote out of a Trump state. Yet the same can be said for Trump in Maine, where the 2nd district leans in his direction. Unlike Nebraska's 2nd, Maine's 2nd is extremely rural and one of the oldest and least racially diverse congressional districts in the entire country. It voted for Trump in 2016 and again in 2020 by a margin of 7 points. That leaves us with the 7 key battlegrounds that have been talked about all cycle long: Wisconsin, Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in the upper Rust Belt, and then North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada across the Sun Belt. Starting in the Rust Belt, this trio is often referred to as the Blue Wall states, as they each voted Democrat in 6 straight presidential cycles between 1992 and 2012 before Trump broke through in 2016, flipping all 3 by less than a single percentage point. Joe Biden returned them to the Democratic column in 2020, winning by a little more than a point in Pennsylvania, almost 3 points in Michigan, and less than a point in Wisconsin.
And guys, this trio proved decisive in both cycles. If Hillary Clinton had held them against Trump, he would never have been elected president. And if Trump had held them against Biden, he would still be serving a 2nd term right now. In 2024, they could again decide the election. Polls in all 3 remain within the margin of error. The average in Pennsylvania is exactly tied. Harris leads by a little more than the point in Michigan and leads Trump by a percentage of 1.5 in Wisconsin. These averages suggest that the race is toss-up. I strongly encourage against making any strong conclusion based on just 1 or 2 point lead. All they really means is that race is close. In that way, all 3 states are truly toss-up. However, as this is a production channel, I am going to give my honest forecast for the outcome in November. Right now, I have Harris the slight favorite in Michigan. It is fundamentally the bluest of the 3, and it would take a quite push for Trump to flip enough voters here in just 4 years. Comparatively, the 2020 margins were closer in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Contrary, the polls in Wisconsin I have it as tilting towards the former president. This is largely driven by the fact that polls have greatly underestimated Trump here in the past. Both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden lead Trump by far greater margins than Harris does now. Clinton lost while Biden only won by a percentage of 0.6. Wisconsin is also the most rural and the whitest, with a lower share of the college-educated voters than either Michigan or Pennsylvania. For those reasons, many analysts project that Wisconsin will trend to the right into the future. The question in 2024, however, is whether the issue of abortion can rally enough Democrats to hold it for now. That could happen. I would have Trump slightly favored right now. Make sure to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. I will see you next video. Thank you.